And that's the sort of interactive activity that's going to be great. And I guess it could function as a mini lesson. But usually if you're doing things like that, it's going to take a little more time, don't you think?
Yeah.
Than 10 or 12 minutes. If they're going to get actively engaged in this, which again, I think it's a great activity. Probably, let me do my mini lesson first.
All right.
And then we'll see if that may be, and then if you say, you know what, after seeing yours, I've decided I still want to do sentence functions.
I know I would have to condense it because I have it planned out for the entire hour. Definitely.
Good. So
It's an
you'll
hour
need to
class.
rethink what a mini lesson is
I
after
already
this.
know.
Yes.
Is the short student-friendly assignment on the worksheet?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, but I didn't put worksheet on there because I'm not doing a worksheet. I'm having you write.
Okay, but it says design a rubric for the worksheet?
Oh, slash activity, does it say?
Okay, is that, no,
Oh, it doesn't?
no.
Okay.
So should I just interpret that it doesn't have to be a worksheet?
Yeah, we just, and here you go, let me get into my, are we live over here?
Yeah.
Okay. So, with our awesome mini lesson, it doesn't have to be a physical worksheet as long as the students are doing something.
Okay.
But since the focus of cycle 3, and like what we'll talk about in a little bit, is on assessment, I want to see how you plan to grade that. It doesn't have to be the full rubric that I gave you for this. It could just say, here's what a 3 looks like, here's what a 2 looks like, here's what a 1 looks like. Or here's a 10, 7, 5, or here's a mastery proficient developing, or however you want to do it, but I need to see you have some little plan for that. You know what I forgot to do? Was link this, damn it, to my actual mini lesson. Oh, damn. Okay. Here we go. So I'm going to do a concise writing mini lesson. When we talk about mini lessons, remember we talk about this gradual release of responsibility, where first I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to show you some examples and non-examples. Then I'm going to ask for your feedback as we sort of work through some examples together. Then I'm going to give you some examples, and then I'm going to make you do it all on your own. Okay? So it says gradual release of responsibility, where it starts with content expert, and it goes down. And timing is really important. If you look at the rubric on this, the idea of a mini lesson is 12 minutes tops. 15 if the students need more time to work independently, but my portion should be done in 5 to 6 minutes. And it didn't bring up much, but we'll just see how it goes. Okay, here is my actual. So we're going to talk about writing concisely, and if you look here at the word, this word actually shows the word scissors, which means to cut, right? And so concise writing, a lot of times our students think, and college students especially, think that more writing equals better, but we want to talk about writing concisely, getting right to the point of our point. And one easy way to do that is by getting rid of this passive voice construction. So this is something you've probably heard before. It may be a refresher for some of you, but by the end of this short lesson today, you'll be able to identify these conjugated forms of the verb to be, which is sometimes called a helping verb or a linking verb. And for our cases, we're going to refer to it as a passive verb. And then we're going to learn how to revise those sentences so that to be no longer exists in our prose as we write. Okay. So, active voice, just like it sounds, it's an active construction where the subject of the sentence does the doing. In a passive construction, the object of the sentence receives the action. And you don't really need to know all that fancy English stuff. But that's just sort of the technical definition. Now in Shakespeare, to be or not to be is a great and deep and endearing question because it ponders the existential. But the problem is there's no way to demonstrate that verb to be. And we want our students writing with demonstrative, active verbs that we can see. Okay, so if a verb is an action word, we want to make sure that we use lively verbs in our prose. Demonstrative verbs, they demonstrate exactly what we're doing. Spicy verbs is how I like to call them. I've heard them called sexy verbs before. I don't really necessarily like to go that route with my high school kids, but it's a way to liven up student writing. And it's very easy. We identify this list of words, which I call boo words, because every time I see them on the paper, I go boo, was, and am, and is, and are. These are all conjugated forms of the verb to be. Again, great in Hamlet, terrible in our college level prose. The shoe was thrown by the teacher at the noisy students, right? If we look at this clunky construction, and even just listening to it out loud, it sounds much longer than it needs to be. And we're talking about concise writing. In fact, the subject of the sentence is supposed to be the teacher. The teacher is supposed to do something that you can see the teacher's supposed to throw. What's the object that the teacher throws? Shoes. And there's that indirect object down there. Where does it throw shoes? At the students. In this sentence, we call it passive because the way it's constructed, the object looks like it's doing the doing. And here's the subject of the sentence over here, was happening. So that's what we call a passive construction. It's very easy to revise. Usually there's a verb, a spicy verb, waiting to happen. So we change that was thrown to an active verb. The teacher threw the shoe at the noisy students. Notice that it's shorter, it's tighter, that it's focused around a demonstrative, active verb. So it's easy to recognize passive construction once you learn to recognize these forms of to be. On Charlie? It's difficult to get students who are bored to be engaged, much like this mini lesson, right? It's difficult to get students who are bored to be engaged. Could somebody help me identify the passive verb that we see, or verbs that we see in there that need to be eliminated? What are the passive constructions of that verb that we just talked about? Remember that we're talking about the passive verb to be in all of its conjugated forms. So, is it not fair to say that we see the verb to be right here? What other forms of to be do you see in this sentence? Do you remember what the past, present, and future of to be?
It is.
Is. Okay, and that's a tricky one. Good call there, Martin, because that's implied with the apostrophe, but that is, it is. And then also, you can see this, who are bored. And so even when you take a phrase, students who are bored, it's very easy to get that much more concise by just saying, bored students, right? That's an easy way to revise out that passive construction. But we've identified is, and we've identified to be, and so let's think about how we can revise that sentence so that it doesn't include either of those constructions. Anyone want to take a stab at it?
Could you use the same words?
No, you can revise the sentence structure any way you want. Thanks, Maria.
Bored students struggle to be engaged.
Oh, what a spicy and demonstrative verb. I can see a student struggle. I know what that looks like. Bored students struggle with engagement, or something like that. Did you have a different idea? I saw a different hand go up. Because there's more than one way to do this. I could also add a subject that's only implied in here. I could say teachers struggle to engage bored students, depending on how I want to change the focus. But either way, those are demonstrative. Again, the same verb, struggle, is so much better than to be. It is difficult, right? So we've noticed all of those. Okay, you want to try one on your own? Check this out. I want you to take a second, each of you, think about it. Again, there's a lot of ways to do this correct. Give it a shot. You can even jot this down. Sometimes it might help to be able to try it one way and then you go, oh shoot, I still used R, and then you scratch it out and you try it again. How might you revise this sentence using a more demonstrative, spicy verb? Of course, we can already recognize the verbs we got to get out of here, right? What's the first verb we're trying to eliminate? To be. Good. And then there's one R. Good. So we're trying to get rid of these two passive verbs. If we think back to our objectives, already we're checking the first box. I can identify passive construction. Now we want to take some chances. Sam, you got an idea? How are you going to revise these passive constructions into a more active voice? Go ahead.
Engaging teachers utilize many methods.
Whoa! Engaging teachers utilize many methods. And I might just add, to motivate students or something for the students. But yeah, absolutely, great job. Mickey, you have one?
I would say teachers have many ways of being engaging. Or is that too long?
No, there's a bigger problem. Teachers have many ways of being engaging. Do you hear that?
To be verb, yeah.
Yep, exactly. You caught this. But we can easily say, teachers have many ways of engage. Now that becomes a verb.
Engaging students.
Engaging students. Right, exactly. And now we have a demonstrative verb that we can see. Make some sense?
Mm-hmm.
Students are more likely to be a disruption if they're bored in class. Give it a shot. Scratch, maybe jot, or maybe something came to your brain already, did something instantly. Jump into your brain and you say, oh, that's easy. I know I have to get rid of the verb are, and to be, and there's that implied are again, right? So how can we think about turning that sentence on its head, adding a more demonstrative verb, and then making it more concise and clear? I mean, just listen, students are more likely to be a disruption if they are bored in class. Just sounds like Siri talking to me, right? Go ahead, what'd you do, Corey?
Board students often disrupt class.
Good. Bored students often disrupt class. Pow! I can see that verb disrupt. I know what that disruption looks like. I know what a bored students look like. And I see students go from being really bored to being really disruptive with the flip of a coin. Last one, new teachers will be successful if they are focused on engaging kids. I hope you see my sort of method here, that my subliminal messages that I've included in this mini lesson just for you all.
Appreciate it.
New teachers will be successful if they are focused on engaging students. Think about some of the demonstrative verbs. How can we squeeze out all the unnecessary words? All we're left with is a juicy pulp of prose. That's the best analogy.
Successful teachers are focused, no. Successful teachers focus on engaging kids.
Good. Successful teachers focus on engaging kids. Anybody else do it a different way?
New teachers succeed when they focus on engaging kids.
Good. New teachers succeed. Notice you turned this into the verb. What was it when they focus on engaging kids?
When focused on kids.
Or when focused on engaging kids. Yeah, absolutely. Did you go with me?
I had pretty much.
Pretty much the same, Sam? Pretty much the same thing? Cool. So, sounds to me like you've got a pretty good grasp on it. And now it's your turn. Okay, I've got 3 for you that I'd like you to do. You can do it in your writer's notebooks, and I'll check those into the grade book a little later in the semester. That's usually how I used to run things, even though obviously that's not going to happen. And now I'm going to give you a few minutes for some independent practice, but I'm going to ask you to share your answers once you're finished. No, I mean, multiple right ways to do this. And I'm going to stop my mini lesson here. Because if I were to continue, you would have these 5 minutes or so. How did I do on time, by the way? Did anybody know? Oh, we can check the tape, I guess, if we need to. But,
It was 10:15 when you started.
and what is it, 25?
10:23.
23, so 8 minutes, right? You can get a lot into 8 minutes, but you gotta be really focused on what it is you're trying to do. And again, this would be your time for independent practice. I'd give you 5 to 7 minutes, you probably would need that, and I'd make sure that after that mini lesson, we share it out. The key is, too, then, whatever we do for homework tonight, I'm gonna make sure, before you go to do it for homework, I'm gonna make sure and say, hey, and for tonight's homework, I don't want to see any passive verbs in there, right? When you're out writing your summaries about whatever you're doing for homework, I also want to make sure that you're revising every single passive verb. So that I'm delivering that short burst of instruction, but that I'm also making sure that I extend it and apply it to the authentic writing that you're doing in your lives. Questions, comments? Can we look at the rubric on the back of the assignment sheet that I gave you? And let's just kind of look at some of the criteria that I've sort of set forth. Let's deconstruct my own practice that I just did. I haven't actually taught a mini lesson in a while. And so let's do some evaluation and let's talk about what worked, what didn't, questions you might have, or suggestions or comments or concerns or anything. So what's the first criteria? And if we want to show that we are mastering that, what are some of the criteria?
Begin with a clear description of goals or outcomes. Candidate demonstrates complete understanding of the topic at hand.
How'd it go? Any concerns about that? Make sense as to what your responsibility is going to be too, right? I mean, to get ready for this, even if it's a simple topic, you're going to want to do a lot of Googling and YouTube watching and stuff like like that, because kids are gonna come up with these questions where you're like, whoa, I hadn't really thought of that before. Oh, what's next? Anything else? What's the next criteria?
Visual presentation.
And you know, I'm a stickler for this stuff. And that I don't want, I mean, obviously there are times when you have to have samples on the board to work through together, right? But even when trying to get some of those ideas together, let's just make sure that it's spaced out properly. Remember that bullet points are reserved for just a couple of words. So if you're gonna put full sentences up there, don't use the bullet points. Make sure they're clear. Having them animate in is also another way to keep things tidy when you're dealing with a lot of text on the screen. Anything else about my visual thing that was helpful or not helpful or distracting or questionable?
I was gonna say it's funny you mentioned visual presentation because every time I get into philosophy education, I think of him.
Why, they just put bullet points everywhere?
No, that he has long paragraphs in his
Slideshows.
slideshows.
Well, they're not trained educators, remember that. They're trained scholars. And so while they may have the scholarship and the research down, the methodology of teaching to young learners escapes them, quite frankly. And so as college students, you're kind of expected to be able to work through that. We know best practices for high school students say break down information into little bitty pieces on each slide. What else?
Next was the oral component.
Okay, I'm linguistically bald. We don't need to talk about that. It only comes from practice. That's why you're gonna have to do some more mini lessons. Do I go too fast? Sometimes, probably. Students often tell me, "Why are you shouting?" Right? Just like that dude said. Okay. What's next?
Collaborative examples.
Now, read the criteria for those, if you would, please, because there's some key things that are subtle that you may not have noticed. I'm sure you noticed, but whether or not you knew about my explicit intention, go ahead.
Presentation includes original student-friendly examples relative to the learning context.
Okay. If the
Examples were very relative to
right.
context of why it was special.
Good, exactly. And our learning goals and ideas from outside of this particular topic of grammar and instruction that are still important to you and in your place as teachers. All my examples had to do with motivation and engagement and ways that we think about student learning and things of that nature. And so it's important, of course you use web resources, but those examples should come from you. And they should be really tailored to your students in that situation. Absolutely. So if you need to name a school, name the school that you're working at. If you need to name a teacher, name yourself. Or something that the kids are going to be familiar with. If you know that the kids are really excited for the Super Bowl, let your examples be related to the Super Bowl. This is about knowing the kids and making those really user-friendly examples. And so for your mini lessons, I want you to use examples not based on who you're going to be teaching to here, but based on your kids and your placement at Harvard. Cool, what's next?
Individual practice.
Right, and if you look at those individual examples, that's kind of where I cut it short, but I was trying to do the same thing, make sure that the samples I give to you to work on are original and authentic, and are relative to what you're thinking about. And is that the end of it?
Time.
Oh, and timing. Hey, I'm gonna be real strict on this timing. So part of the thing is, go learn as much as you can about this topic and figure out how you can get the key ideas, only the things they need. I mean, I could have gone into a lot of different things about subject-verb or agreement or things of that nature, but I really just wanted to focus on this notion of active verbs to improve writing. What else? Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns about your own critiques of my little performance? What is a performance?
I was going to say, I think your performance is pretty well. We go give a mini lesson.
When you go into teacher mode and as you develop your own personas, you'll sort of...
Well, I mean, I see you walk around and you're like, oh, you're really dramatic and stuff like that. And so it's engaging for students. So.
And again, not all students. Some students will be like, oh my God, he's freaking out. Way too much. That's my persona, right, that I've sort of worked hard to develop over time. And that's not everybody's persona. My favorite teacher of all time, Dr. Sarah Longquist over our main campus. It's just the quietest teacher ever. It's just so quiet. Man, that class was always the coolest.
I mean, she's in the department chair now.
Yeah. She was the department chair when I took my master's degree, those many years ago. What about topics? Are you ready to decide on a topic that you'd be interested in? Sam?
The possessive apostrophe.
Okay. You've got that. It's an important rule. There are apostrophes everywhere in today's day and age. You got it. Yes, Morgan.
Transitional devices.
I love it. Kids struggle with this, right? And this is about sentence combining. It could be about sentence combining, or it could be about paragraph transitions, absolutely. But transitions in general, I think we can touch on both of those and still be focused.
I'll go with compound sentences.
Cool. I think that's very closely related to what you're thinking of before. And kids need this too. And it's going to be kind of related to Morgan sometimes, and that's okay.
Also, because I would like to play Schoolhouse Rock if you let me. I don't know if that's too long. Probably isn't.
Gonna have to be something you figure out. I mean, read the rubric again. I don't know that this mini lesson, now maybe Schoolhouse Rock is the perfect introduction to the lesson. It may well be, but I'd revisit that before making that decision, for sure.
Oh, I was originally thinking prepositional phrases, but I don't know, maybe.
You can do prepositions.
You know, struggling with that between like indirect and direct objects, so.
Oh, okay.
Can you put both up there and I choose? Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I don't really care unless Stephanie's dying to do one or the other.
I don't think she's dying to really, but.
I need one of you to do what the kids in your classroom do, and that's like at some point you gotta look at the camera and be like, is he watching? Is somebody watching right now? I'm just gonna give you indirect, no, because that's less, no. Here's 6th grade, 7th grade, 7th and 8th grade. Yeah, do the objects, I guess.
You can do one for
I love how you never make them very.
Yeah. It would actually not be good. If, no, you know, I'm gonna get away from the minutia one. I'm gonna give you the more holistic phrases,
Okay.
prepositions.
Okay.
And then think about punctuating and when to use them. And go. And then should we just saddle one with Steph? I emailed her. I'll just let her know that these are off the board.
And she's doing hers now.
A week from today. Yeah. I know I like had a full-on panic when I was like, oh my gosh, I have to teach tomorrow. Just out of the normal schedule. Okay, let's talk a little about cycle 3. Get it?
It's good.
Yeah.
I love it.
Or what I like to call the tri-cycle.
Thank you.
There is a unique focus. Cycle 3 doesn't do much different from what you've been doing. There is a unique focus on assessment.
By the way, I pulled that up. I don't know if I got the right one, but there's only 2 sections. There's no reflection in this one.
Let's take a look. I thought I would be able to link right from the slideshow to it, but apparently not. Right, so there should be a planning, teaching, and then this assessment portion. In the assessment portion, you'll see that that's kind of where you'll be doing a lot of your reflecting. I just kind of wanted to go through these with you. Just note that obviously we want you to be creating assessments and looking at those assessments in ways that show us that you're thinking about student learning. Remember that you said, a lot of semester 1's about thinking about what you do, and here in semester 2 we want you to think about what the kids are up to. So I just want you to look at the instrument together. First, we want demonstrates an understanding of how learners develop and address interpretive, critical, and evaluative abilities related to the study of literature. So we're talking about, we want you to have some assessment of student reading. That's English language for you, right? They should be reading something, and you should have some assessments for their reading that show us that you understand how kids learn to read. Yes?
So you want us to have a reading or component portion in the videos we have?
Now, that doesn't have to necessarily show up in the videos,
Okay.
just so you know.
Okay.
But you will need to give some physical proof.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an assessment I did to see how my students were reading. And here's what I did, and here's some samples of how students performed. And as we'll talk about later, here's the feedback I gave those students. So that we're starting to think about, there's and again, not to throw too much at you at once, but also to kind of clarify what's going to happen. There's this reading assessment portion, and then there's a compositional assessment portion. So in each of those, you'll be collecting data on one or more students for a couple of different assessments, and you'll kind of be able to take all that assessment info and be like, here's what I was thinking about doing to figure out how this student read. Here's how this student performed. This is what this tells me about. I'm kind of getting just a little ahead of myself. So I don't want to go too much further. When you think about this, your cycle 3 at some point in the plans should have some assessment of reading. Obviously, you do those every day, right? Every single day, you're doing something to assess reading. So this is about collecting a couple of ideas about how they learn and showing it to us. Let me just kind of keep going. I'm not trying to cut your questions short because they're good, but I just want to make sure that we touch everything before I skip too far ahead. Okay, good. Formative assessments for reading. We know what this means. How can we identify how students are developing as readers as we go? And they got to give us some kind of data. Now, data doesn't always mean numbers. It could be an informal checking, or maybe it's you're doing one of those timed things to see how far a student gets. But again, you'll kind of want if you're not sure about some of those best practices, we can always sit down and talk. Or again, go to some of those websites, Read, Write, Think, and Annenberg, that provide strategies for, hey, what's a good formative reading assessment?
Wait, what website did you just mention?
Those are those ones that we presented at the beginning of the year.
Oh,
Read,
okay.
Read, Write, Think, Annenberg, Edutopia, all those always have good info. And then we move to writing, formative assessments for composition, right? So your kids have to be doing some writing or some composing. It doesn't necessarily have to be an essay, right? How are you assessing them, not just on the end result, but in the baby steps? By the way, everything we're going to do a little bit later is tailored directly towards this document. Okay, so don't forget too bad. Just want to give you a nice overview. So summative reading, some formative reading, some summative compositional, some formative compositional, feedback. The things that you make, those assessments, create opportunities to give students feedback. It says multimodal, obviously if you're limited by technology. But you do want to be able to say to them and to write to them and to maybe provide them with more models or remediation. But to provide that feedback during and after the writing process. So that it's not just go home and write your essay, but like let's talk about how to write an introduction, depending on what project you have students doing. And you want to make sure that that the feedback is trying to get their ideas, engage students' ideas, and encourage their continued development. And we can talk about my feedback on chalk and wire too, because I feel like that's probably one of the places where I struggle the most. Summative assessments for the study of literature. Summative means final, your summary knowledge of information. Unfortunately, this often looks like multiple choice tests. I don't want multiple choice tests. Even if your cooperating teacher has a multiple choice test, I would like for you to say, I've got this really jerk teacher, and I know you've got the best multiple choice quiz on Hatchet that the world has ever seen, Mrs. XYZ, and I know your Hatchet quiz has proven over time to demonstrate excellent knowledge of Hatchet, and somehow you've written multiple choice questions that allow students to be interpretive in the way that they think about big ideas and essential questions. But I've got this jerk teacher, and he's saying maybe my students could demonstrate just as much knowledge by writing a newspaper article about it. And so for a summative assessment, instead of having my students take your wonderful quiz, if you don't mind, Miss X, Y, and Z, in order to pacify my tyrannical, egomaniacal, monomaniacal instructor, if it's okay with you, Miss X, Y, and Z, I would like to use this as a summative assessment instead. He's all touchy-feely, he believes students perform, and if they go, no, you're using my 50-point multiple choice because it's proven to work, we'll work with it. But summative assessments, unfortunately, people think that means what are the right answers. It's not. It's a summation of what you have learned about the topic or the theme during this unit of study? Yes, let me have it. Everybody at once, go.
Can your summative assessment incorporate both the reading and the writing?
Absolutely. The best summative assessments do both reading and writing.
Okay,
I know we have them separate.
I know that's what's confusing.
That's the thing I hate most about teacher education in general, is they always talk about, well, what are you going to do for reading? Well, what are you going to do for writing? And it drives me insane, because they're the exact same.
Okay, that's fine.
They're not the exact same things. Yes, let me have it.
Okay, so my wonderful mentor teacher.
Mrs. X.
Yep, Mrs. X. That was my his name. He or she's name. But her critique for me was for cycle 2, I did too many project-based assessments and not enough multiple choice. And she says that teachers ourselves need to have more concrete
Evidence of student understanding.
Student understanding, she says, and that's under multiple choice tests. So you need to have more multiple choice.
Welcome to the wonderful world of student teaching, where you have the issue of, you've probably heard this a bazillion times in your educational training. You know this. This is the problem here. It's one of these things where you go like this. And then you go like this. You know what I'm doing here? You see this thing? It's kind of not the best version of it.
That's a Rorschach test?
Yeah, no, it's not really a Rorschach test, but you've seen this image of the two.
Oh, yeah,
Is it two faces or is it a black face? Right?
yeah.
It's called a gestalt. It's not really all that important, but it comes from this school of psychology. Two people can look at the same problem and see two entirely different things. And that happens in education, and I wish I had an answer that was just, okay, no problem, she's right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and she's wrong. But it's not. And so we put you all in the unfortunate position where on the one side you hear the one thing and on the other side you hear the other, and I'll just say...
So I'm thinking of
Yes.
having just a...
How about this? What if you compromise and have the students write their own multiple choice questions? How's that for a compromise? What if you said, kids, you got to write each other quizzes, and they can only be multiple choice questions?
Not like that, but I will try it.
I don't know, I think that
She
could be
may like
fun.
it. She may go, you know what, they might really thrive in that.
And I used to do the lesson where I would put all the Bloom's verbs up, and my students would have to write 2 questions for each level of Bloom's taxonomy, and trade their questions with another student, and the student would get to pick one of those 2 that they would answer, and then they'd have to grade their students. That's how I did tests. As soon as I finally freed myself from the shackles of objective questioning, that's all I did. They wrote each other's tests. For the when you needed that knowledge level stuff. But I understand that you're in a placement, and if your teacher says, no, you're using this test for a summative assessment of literature, I understand it, I'll disagree with it, and I want to apologize for disagreeing with it. I'll try my best not to hold it against you for a grade. I'm just kidding.
Because I disagree with it so much too, because, yeah.
Hey, I student taught where the teacher made me, where there was tape for every desk.